evening, everyone. I have the distinct pleasure of kicking off our event this evening. My name is Pat Bradshaw. I'm the Dean of the Sobey School of Business, and I'm also on the board of the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Public Affairs, CCEPA. And on behalf of the board and staff of the centre, I'd like to welcome you here tonight. I know you're going to have a wonderful evening. I had the opportunity to have dinner with our keynote speaker, and I must say I'm on a high because of that. Let me just give a little background on CCEPA. CCEPA is an organization co-founded by St. Mary's University and the Atlantic School of Theology. Its mandate is to provide an arena for critical thinking, public discussion, and research into current ethical challenges in our society. CCEPA does this by presenting public lectures, conversations, and discussions designed to inform debate and facilitate informed choices, and to mediate ethical concerns through a process of critical listening and engagement. CCEPA also supports research into ethics and assists organizations and individuals in integration of ethics into public practices and policies. Before I introduce Dr. Kinkaide, however, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping issues. I'd like, first of all, in particular, to thank our co-sponsors for this event, the Province of Nova Scotia, specifically the Office of the Chief Information Officer, the Canadian Business Ethics Research Network, and the Alberta Council of Technologies. I'd also like to welcome tonight our live stream audience and invite you to participate in the question period through the chat feature on your screen. Those of you on the live stream, the computer, please also remember to provide us with an evaluation about your thoughts of the night's events. And those of you in the audience, you also have an evaluation form, and your feedback is absolutely essential to CCEPA and moving forward on future programs. Also, as you leave the auditorium tonight, please have a peek at the information table at the back of the room about CCEPA, and feel free to help yourself to DVDs of past programs and see what is on display for future and upcoming events. Now, let me briefly introduce our speaker, Dr. Perry Kinkaide. Perry Kinkaide is the founder and first president of the Alberta Council of Technologies. He's also been the president and chairman of the board of Kinkaide Enterprises Incorporated, former managing director of KPMG Consulting in Edmonton, and assistant deputy minister with the Alberta government. He tells me that he likes to take things in 12-year cycles. So he's currently retired in 2001, and since then established Kinkaide Enterprises for allocating venture capital and assigning operating officers to emerging technology-based enterprises in Western Canada. Perry continues to provide consulting and advisory services to both the public and private sectors. He was recognized in July 2007 by the Alberta Venture magazine as one of 50 of the most influential Albertans. He earned his BA degree from Colgate University in '64, his MSc in '67, and his PhD in '72 from the University of Alberta in brain research. Perry is co-chair of the Canadian Alberta Fusion Institute. He serves as director for General Credit Services, Troy Media, Bedrock Environmental Services, Vision State, and was formerly on the board of the Alberta Professional Planners Institute, Goodwill Industries, the Certified Management Accountants of Alberta, and the Institute of Certified Management Consultants of Alberta. He is past chair of the St. Alberta's Community Health Council and the Continuous Learning Community Society. I know you're going to enjoy our talk tonight, and please help me welcome Dr. Kinkaide. Harry.
After that sterling introduction, and thank you very much, probably none of you believe I'm retired. The fact of the matter is I am retired. And I am concerned, and hopefully that my concern echoes a concern that you have, which has drawn you to this session today on ethics and technology, who to trust. My concern is that in some respect we're too busy to care anymore. Change is endemic from almost every quarter. Whether you do environmental scanning and look at the socio-demographics that we face, and we hear about the baby boomers, we look at multiculturalism. We hear about a global economy where decisions being made in business today in one portion of the world are affected by decisions being made on the other half of the world. Commodity prices changing dramatically, affecting our businesses. We hear about regulatory changes and the changes going on worldwide as it relates to democracy and what impact that is having in various parts of the world, including our own country, and changes that are facing how we govern and what we govern. But probably most important of all, and this was a consideration that affected me maybe 10, 12 years ago, it seems to me that the rate at which technologies are entering into society deserves more attention. And I underscore the word rate. We've always seen changes in technology, whether it was the printing press, which created a revolution in its own, or the automobile and the new production lines. The changes that we're seeing today, and I'm using technology here in the broadest sense. I'm not just talking about information technology. I'm talking about technology in all forms. Certainly information technology catches everyone's attention with regard to the emergence of the internet and all of the byproducts. But I'm talking about technology, whether it's in agriculture, in transportation, in healthcare, in retail, in education. I'm concerned at all levels that the rate at which technology is entering all aspects of our society is ungovernable. And if it's ungovernable, then who is in fact in charge? And if no one's in charge, then who to trust? And that's the essence of some of the things I'd like to share with you today. Let's take education by way of example. How many of you have heard of MOOCS? Good, massive online learning courses, where one prof from MIT could be teaching 25,000 individuals on a web TV station, bringing him curriculum from one of the great universities, and distributing that knowledge on a world scale. That's got dramatic implications as it takes hold, even if it isn't monetized, even if there is not a degree or a certificate at the end. People are obviously acquiring knowledge from some of the best using internet technology to get access to it. The area that is even more dramatic, I think, is in healthcare, and I think we've only begun to scratch the surface in terms of the ramifications of emerging technologies and what the implications are for healthcare. Take, for example, stem cells. Everybody know what stem cells are? You all have them. Every one of us is a byproduct of a stem cell that grew us into what we are today. In a stem cell is your DNA, the formula or the pattern that is a byproduct of environmental circumstances ultimately emerges the human being that you are today. With stem cells, we have the capacity, if we can mobilize those stem cells, to literally eliminate degenerative disease. We have the capacity to grow things. They're already growing skin. They can take blood out of the body, out of the bone marrow, and put good blood back in, grown with stem cells. They've done cornea. I understand from a doctor who I did some work with in Ontario a few months ago that they're doing hands of military personnel coming back from Afghanistan. They're doing that in the military in Texas. There are probably no limits. Imagine stem cells, a technology, not unlike genetic engineering, where you can literally take your body as it is today and replace things. It's not all here today, but it's certainly, if you've read the newspaper, you're seeing articles at least monthly of a new application of stem cells. You've got stem cell tourism going on, where people are shopping in Japan and China and Germany for advanced stem cell treatment. Those ramifications on the profession of healthcare, which are highly interventionistic, when you heal thyself with the cells that exist within your body, have dramatic implications for the practice of healthcare. Let me try an exercise. How many of you, if given the option, and this is the promise of Ponce's promise, I call it, the promise of everlasting life, how many of you would opt for everlasting life if you had the choice? 1, 2. It's not unusual. I've done this so many times, maybe in front of 10,000 people over the last 10 years, if I asked that question, and the answers are always a couple out of 100. Let me ask another question, because it does confuse me of offering you an unlimited amount of something that we say is so precious, which is life itself, and I've offered you an infinite amount, utopia, one would think. How many of you would opt for another year or another day? Make it easy. How many of you would opt for another day? Many more hands. Now that's surprising. So I give you a limited amount of something, one, and I get a very popular response, but I offer an infinite amount and I get no response. So it leaves me confused as what the meaning of life is. Why I wouldn't want an infinite amount of something so grand, but I'll take one. How many years would you choose if you had the option? You know what the answer typically is? Got a figure in your head? Someone said to you beforehand, how many years would you like? Most people say about 100. Interesting that God gave us about 100. What that tells me is life is existential. We don't want to have the same experience over and over again. Maybe that's what it is. But if a new technology enters into society such as stem cells, it forces us to rethink or give thought to what life is, what the meaning of life may well be. There is an impact of a technology that will have dramatic impact on our values, our policies, our practices, and our professions. Imagine the impact for medicine. Let me look at some other things in the field of medicine. With analytics, ever here know what analytics is? Analytics is essentially taking large databases, could even be small databases, and using data as an aid or to automate decision making. Doesn't sound like anything particularly dramatic there. I mean, the age of reason in the Middle Ages was the emergence of empiricism in order to assist in decision making. Rather than Aristotelian logic and debate, we were going to use empiricism, data, experience, experiments. But here we are entering into this century, and all of a sudden we have a revolution emerging that we're going to use data for decision making. Well, so be it. I'm not quite sure what we have been using up to this point, but it's apparent that we haven't been using the data that we had or the data that we have. And so here we are today, entering into a period of time with a new technology called analytics, which is simply the capacity to look at large data sets and derive meaning from those data. Health data. Let's take a health data. Most health data today is private. It's personal. Government plays a major role in protecting us from abuses that might occur if someone had access to your personal records. But at the same time, because we can't get access to that data, we may be violating or missing or not knowing that some treatments may not be working or may not be working well. What do we expect to find in these large data sets that could be of interest to medicine? Well, certainly to better understand what interventions are working and what aren't. But there are evaluative data in those technologies as well that might relate to the practice of individual physician. There's also data that tell us a very interesting phenomenon that I was made aware of some 15 or 20 years ago as a consultant, and it was about readmission to hospital. I didn't know whether this data was real. Someone had presented it to me. I wasn't sure I trusted him because he may have had ulterior motives in that I was consulting to his employer, and he wasn't sure he wanted to share this data with him. And that data was data that took a look at the reasons for readmission to hospitals, or admission in the first place. One was automobile accidents, one was accidents in general, one was pharmaceutical errors, and one was medical errors. The one that was rising the fastest was pharmaceutical errors, and next was medical errors. Seatbelt legislation pretty well had reduced dramatically admission as a product of automobile accidents, and accidents in general in Canada were higher than elsewhere, but were not rising. That was telling us that the code of medicine, was thou shalt do no harm, appeared to be violated. In fact, if the primary reason for admission or readmission was some have called it a therapeutic misadventure or a pharmaceutical error, maybe a byproduct of high-tech medicine, maybe a byproduct of complexities of new pharmacologies. But that data was verified last year when Deloitte was asked to do the introductory presentation for a conference that I was organizing through the Alberta Council of Technologies, and they validated from large data sets that the primary reason for readmission to a hospital had to do with an error or an uncertainty. Well, what does that say to the trust that we've placed and the exclusive rights of practice that we've granted to a profession, when in fact the primary reason for usage of one of their tools is a mistake or an error or an uncertainty? That was validated again last week at a conference on analytics, big data in the cloud by IBM. At the same time, as we come to understand the power of data converted into knowledge and being made available at the speed of light to everyone, IBM is concerned. They don't want to push away the medical profession. They don't want to bury it. They don't want to be highly critical of it. They want to work with them for a motive that you may or may not appreciate that relates to supply and demand, how much supply we have, where the demands are, may even someday relate to who can pay and who can't. But what IBM has been studying is how do we use this data in a way that isn't offensive? I mean, what I gave to you for a few minutes there, with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, although it's real, can be considered, or could be considered by many offensive, because just the understanding of it may undermine trust. And if a profession has that exclusive rights of practice granted by the state because they have promised that thou shalt do no harm, you really don't want to go around proclaiming that they are doing harm. Somebody's going to get upset. So what IBM has been wrestling with is how to bring that data to the doctor so it reduces his error rate. And if you confront him with it, he may run away. We all know someone gives you a traffic ticket, you avoid that intersection, or you slow down in future at that intersection, but you don't necessarily stop driving fast. We know that to give someone a traffic ticket doesn't eliminate speeding. We know that punishing results in avoidance of that behavior, but not necessarily, it suppresses it, but doesn't necessarily disappear. So how do you actually help the doctor in his intervention with the client when you have that data? Well, what they've been doing is bringing that data onto reports so the doctor actually has access to more than his knowledge and more than his experience and more than his records, that on the report and the diagnostics is a section which is, have you given thought to? And what Watson, which is what they've called their tool, what Watson has done is he's looked at all the literature and all the diagnoses that look at all similar and ask the doctor to give thought to some additional information as an aid for his decision making. So it's not replacing him, it's working with him. And this is a technique in order to retain the trust, but in order to give him a handle on something he never had before, and not at this level anyway, which is data. This is not unique to medicine. Engineering's facing the same thing. I understand from Stantec Engineering that there are some areas of engineering that are literally disappearing because of emerging and new technologies. The world of transportation. Your pilot says, hope you had a good flight, and tells you when he's going to leave, and that's about it. I mean, the pilot does very little in the cockpit anymore. We know that drones are out there being managed from thousands of miles away as military technologies. We've seen in sports. How many of you saw Moneyball? Moneyball is another example of analytics in practice, where using data as an aid or even as an alternative to the old coach was outperforming the old coach. That the art of sports or the art of sports medicine could be beaten by access to data. The same with individual sports performance. We can move data at the speed of light. We can move it into anybody's hands. It's almost impossible to regulate where data goes. Is this a good thing or a bad? Well, some will say this is leading to the empowerment of the consumer. The president and executive of IBM talks about the personalization of society. That data is now no longer in preserves for the few, but whether it be through Google or through tools such as IBM is developing and HP is developing and Cisco is working with, data is becoming a commodity that any one of us can get access to. The transition there is dramatic. It could be dramatic. From a period of the last 1,000 years where the king of the castle was the doctor, the lawyer, the engineer, the architect, the teacher, all of who got exclusive rights of practice as a byproduct of the promise that thou shalt do no harm, and because they knew and the client didn't know. You know what the origin of the word client is? You do, because we talked about it over dinner. But client was one step above a slave in Roman times. Why? Because a client didn't know, but the professional did. And that relationship has sustained and built phenomenal progress, I think, in our Western society principally, because we've allowed information into society, but always through the professions that promise that thou shalt do no harm. But now, the client has access to data. The client is becoming a consumer. The client can shop. The client walks into an office, and rather than taking his medicine and going home, he starts a relationship, or she does. They have an education. They may have done some homework on internet. They may have conferred with the network. They may have looked around, and they may go into the office feeling that they're informed, and they want a dialogue. They want to better understand, and they want to know how to participate, and they want to make a decision. They want to be part of the decision-making process instead of a victim of the decision-making process. Medicine is changing from being a knowledge-based profession to one that it always was, with a strong relational component. That's very different. And the medical profession is under extraordinary pressure. The pressure from the taxpayer. More units of service, faster, fewer errors, treat more people, handle the privatization, public issues. Medicine's under tremendous pressure. Well, that void, or that vortex of energy, is just a huge invitation for technology to arrive. And technology is arriving, and it's moving the power across to other professions, but it's also moving it down to the consumer. In order to validate whether or not this is correct, I did some asking around of various medical schools in Canada on whether or not the criteria for admission to medical school was solely the brightest, the most intelligent. And increasingly, there's apparently a selection criteria tool that's been developed at McMaster that's been adopted by numerous medical schools in Canada that look at relational skills as well. No surprise that if medicine is moving from simply I know and you don't to one where we have a problem that we will work together, that's that using data as an aid for decision making. But as I said earlier, data can also be used to automate decision making. So let's take it to that next level. If up to this point I've talked about analytics as a technology and being able to move it at the speed of light to the level of the consumer as an aid for decision making, which is what I explained IBM is doing, what about automating decision making? How far off is it from the day that the physician or the pharmacist or whomever is not even trusted as much as the machine itself? That the machine makes no errors or makes very few errors and learns. Algorithms are being written that if a mistake is made, that algorithm will be revised as a product of access to additional information. Is it conceivable that the professions as we've known them are going to be displaced initially through tools that are aiding the decision making, but ultimately displaced by algorithms that actually automate the decision making? And we chat over dinner about, gee, are we losing something? What is it that we're losing that an algorithm couldn't capture? Is it sensitivity to matters of the family? Is it personal capability to take on more responsibility? Is it affordability? Is it expediency? Are there things that no machine could possibly take into consideration? I don't know the answer to that. I know when the question gets posed, that if I let it go on, the person begins to present variables that can be quantified. If they can be quantified and they can be measured, then an algorithm can be written to introduce them into the formula. And so it does begin to raise some very serious questions about how far do we go with technology? How far do we go with technology in transportation? How far do we go with technology in war? How far do we go with technology in government? Technology in government. What could technology possibly be doing to democracy? Hell, we all know what the media can do today. We can measure through statistics and through probability statements, sometimes poorly, but we're getting better at it. just exactly what the populace is thinking, what the populace position is at any time. Why wait 4 years? Why wait 4 years to have an election when you could be shaping policy as a byproduct of tapping into your population on an ongoing basis? It's being done today. I mean, there's no question that in the last 15 to 20 years, the media and market research is playing an increasing role in governing policy and policy shaping without an election. So that technology, the technology of analytics, the technology of aiding and possibly automating decision-making, takes us into a whole new realm. Now, some say it gets darkest before it gets pitch black. They're the pessimists. And some talk about foresight and illumination, and we're moving into a world of utopia, where we have access to something so precious in the form of knowledge. And what would the world be if we all knew, or we all could know? Will we leave some behind? Will we have a split society of those who know and have gone to the effort to know from those who don't particularly care and remain dependent on some other body? I don't know what this evolution looks like. But I don't also know where this discussion is taking place, and I think it should take place, and that's what concerns me. That's why I was delighted to have this invitation. We've been entertaining discussions like this through the Alberta Council of Technologies, not so much about technology, but what are the implications of these emerging technologies? Let me take another one. This is probably less offensive to you, but very offensive in Alberta. How many of you know what fusion is? Not fission, fusion. Fusion is what the sun does. Fission is what they do in Japan and what they do in Germany and what they do in France with fission reactors. Fusion is the power of the sun. No radioactivity, no carbon dioxide. Imagine. It's often been viewed as the utopian form of energy. How far off is it? What are the ramifications? Well, through the Alberta Council of Technologies, we formed the Canada-Alberta Fusion Energy Program, which is essentially a monitoring program to better understand the status of fusion energy and what the socioeconomic ramifications of fusion might be to Alberta, or to Canada for that matter. And what we found out is that there had been a lot of promising and over-promising, and depending upon whose door we were knocking on in the political world, if they'd heard about fusion, you know, doggone well, there was resistance. They didn't want to hear. Here comes more snake oil, more over-promising and under-delivering. But as we went out into the world, and as we discovered in Livermore, California, in particular, that fusion is imminent. Now, what is imminent? Is imminent 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years? Imminent is probably within this decade, and some say within 3 years. The way they're achieving fusion, inertial fusion, as they're experimenting with it in Livermore, California, is they take laser beams, and they aim laser beams to something as big as the tip of your finger, in which is deuterium and tritium, which is derived from seawater. There's an 11 billion year supply of seawater, of deuterium and tritium. And these laser beams, for a billionth of a second, will create 1 trillion volts. The belief is with the compression, they'll get ignition. What is this thing anyway? They'll get ignition. With that ignition, they repeat it like you do the cylinder of a car, by repeatedly firing the laser beams in to the deuterium and tritium, replacing that pellet, and you get energy, large quantities of heat, in a dome about the size of this room. When that explosion hits the walls, like the walls of a cylinder in a car engine, it heats up those walls. They don't explode. They've controlled the size of the pellet and the amount of deuterium and tritium. So it's a controlled reaction that will heat that dome, and that heat is then transferred through a lithium transfer to steam to electricity. So you have fusion, as we had stem cells, as we have analytics, emerging in the world of energy as possibly an alternative to using hydrocarbons for energy. What are the ramifications for Alberta? Well, let me tell you. In meeting with a Minister of Energy a few years ago, after we had done our homework and had spent some time talking to Public Policy Committee and making sure that his deputy and his assistant deputies were briefed, we met with the minister. You can imagine the pride. We've done our homework. This is the magic moment. And in introducing the discussion, made reference to, we would like to talk to you about fusion energy and the relevance of fusion energy possibly to Alberta. And the response we got back was, I don't know what you're talking about. I heard a giggle. I didn't feel giggle. I felt, I can't tell you what I felt. I was stunned. I mean, you spend 3 years getting ready for a moment like that, and you think this is going to be a crescendo, and you get a pushback like, I don't know what you're talking about. I wanted to crawl under the rug or get out of that room as fast as I could. I knew this meeting's going nowhere. What do you do when you're rejected? You take a look. You try and understand about what took place in that meeting. What went on? What did he mean? And I can remember mowing the lawn and thinking that summer, I think what he really meant is I don't want to know what you're talking about. I think what he sensed was if fusion energy could be real, I don't want anything to do with it because of what it could possibly do to the Alberta economy. Make sense? I mean, most people do things because they make sense. And I figure that's probably what he really meant is I don't want anything to do with this. So the next step was to go directly to the oil and gas industry. Seems to make sense if what he is a proxy to the oil and gas industry, and ask the oil and gas industry what they thought. And there is in Alberta the Oil Sands Leadership Initiative. It's now been transformed into Canadian Oil Sands Leadership Initiative. In any case, we asked the oil and gas industry what they thought. And you know what the reaction was? And it was like this. Fusion, that's heat, isn't it? If it's heat, bring it on. I thought, wow, completely different reaction. Bring it on, yes. We don't need to use water, and we don't need to use natural gas in order to extract hydrocarbons from the oil sands. That technology would be brilliant. We could use that. Even if in 30 or 40 years it becomes an alternative, it gives us a 30 or 40 year play with a clean form of technology, which would clean up the political issues that we face. So there in that moment, you can see policy formulation, and that has now resulted in additional research, which will be coming out in the fall this year, about the imminence of fusion energy, the status of fusion energy worldwide. We're researching it throughout the world to better understand what the socioeconomics are for Alberta and for Canada at large. But we need to do more of this with these emerging technology. We don't want to become victims. As a country this small and with this level of intelligence, we should be right on top of these technologies. Even though there's a rebalancing of basic to applied science that's making some of the universities very nervous, that rebalancing should elevate our appetite to understand the relationship of technology to our society, and in particular, to what we value. Back to the topic and the title. Technology is neutral. Fusion is neutral. Analytics is neutral. Stem cells are neutral. It's in whose hands? In whose hands, who will be practicing these technologies, and what are their values? What are the values that relate to things that we care about? Is the family of vestigial organ, is that going to disappear? Is everlasting life a problem, or even life extension? Will we overpopulate the planet, or will it self-regulate? Will fusion energy, and that is with a utopian supply of energy that could reverse climate change, is that a good thing? Are there unintended consequences? Are there things that we should know as a society and we should be orchestrating a debate around today instead of being in a defensive position tomorrow? Should we know more about other technologies? I mean, we hear about it in sports. It's a lot of fun to discuss over the water cooler or whatever, data and sports teams. But that type of discussion is in fact going on in corporations in the world at large today, on every front. And it's coming. And my concern isn't that it's coming. My concern is that we're not even bothering to be prepared. And these technologies come fast. Ever heard of fracking? 3 years ago, no one knew how to spell it. Today, the United States proclaims it could be energy independent. My buddy in New York, every time I go to see him, would present me with just one more book about peak oil and the end of the world. And 3 years later, he's got a surplus supply and he's becoming an exporter. These technologies arrive very quickly. And with internet and the capacity to move information at the rate that we can move it today, they can penetrate and affect societies quickly. And we should be spending time thinking about them. And bodies like this need to form across this country. I don't think that government with its 4-year cycle is the right place to expect that they will anticipate the implications of emerging technologies beyond a 4-year cycle. They're in power, they want to stay in power, they want to get the power. That's a 4-year play. There's not a lot to be gained by voters by looking 20 years out. Look at corporations. They're driven primarily by shareholders who want a return on their investment, and they want it now, and they want it as soon as possible. So they're driven by very short-term perspectives. Even though in some industries they may have 20-year capital construction cycles, by and large, corporations are rather short-term in their perspectives. No corporations today are investing in fusion. That's being done principally by governments, and usually through military. We need to spend more time looking at emerging technologies. We need to better understand their socioeconomics, and we need to have entities in the NGO sector that are not driven by a 1-year perspective or a 4-year cycle, but should be driven by more of a long-term perspective to help orchestrate dialogues like this. Now, the fact that this is a pretty good audience. I mean, we do our through the Alberta Council of Technologies, we'll choose a new theme each year. We don't do individual, well, we do individual seminars, but we'll do a series of seminars around one theme for an entire year. And we may start out with 6 and end up the year with 1,000. We've done a year on access to capital, which everybody thinks in the commercialization of emerging technologies, all you need to do is find out where the money is, and you got the magic. But what we tried to demonstrate in that first year, that success to an entrepreneur is a lot more than money. It has something to do with manpower, and marketing, sometimes mergers, a little bit of moxie, and metrics, and monitoring. There's a lot of M's in there. But we tried to demonstrate that valley of death that is often called of the entrepreneur is only successful when there is an incubation, a whole array of circumstances around that idea in order to make it successful and make it commercialized. I see ideas a dime a dozen in bars all the time. Sometimes the same idea is 20 years later. But to make an idea commercially viable requires a whole array of inputs: money, marketing, management, manpower, moxie, mergers, marriages, and metrics. I've done that before, as you can tell. Very few entrepreneurs understand the full array of what is called for in order for a technology to succeed and make it commercially. We did a year on rural broadband. We wanted to show Canada the relevance of rural broadband for communities to survive, in order for populations to remain where they are, for young kids to see that there are jobs in their community. In order to do that, we talked about rural broadband and the importance of not over-promising and under-delivering, which was often happening on the technology side, or the naive buyer in the municipalities buying fiber or buying cell towers without understanding what they really were getting into. The conclusion of that year is we needed an honest broker. That in the presence of an emerging technology, there's often that tendency to overhype and to get very excited about it, and then for disappointment, which ends up pushing that technology back. And then we've got another 10-year wait before we can get a sense of that technology now being safe or supportable. That was quite a successful year because it did bring the rural communities a much higher level of understanding of the relevance of connectivity, of the superhighway as it's called. The third year was around fusion energy, which I've discussed. The fourth year was around cell therapy. The fifth year was around clean technologies as alternatives. And the last year was offloading intelligence when machines decide, which was looking at the technology of automation of decision making. And then we caught the wave of Moneyball and Watson when we got into analytics, big data in the cloud. This year our theme is innovation and enterprise, the people, the passion, all about that so-called valley of death, the commercialization cycle from an idea or a concept to success. And trying to get those entrepreneurs to tell us more of the story of the journey than about the product itself. To talk about the passion associated with trying to commercialize a new idea and the disappointments. It's an incredible journey. If you have never started a business, you'd be stunned. I'd never really started a business. As my wife put it one time when I came to her with the fact that on Valentine's Day I announced that I had lost $100,000 on an investment. Take a deep breath. I did, and I waited. I was expecting a tornado. What I got is, you're forgiven. At a blink of an eye. I was astounded. Thought we had a pretty good relationship, but this is amazing. And she said, you've never been in the alley before. I said, what do you mean? you've been at the university, you're protected from the riffraff, you've been in KPMG, you've been an assistant deputy with the government, all the riffraff are filtered away from you. You're now down in the alley. They can smell it. They know, and they are so slick. They was snake oil. They know how to get that money out of your pocket so fast. And they did. The lesson was to stay out of the alley. She's probably not listening. I went back to the alley, but I went back to the alley with some assistants, some people who I trusted, who might give me better advice than what a business plan read. I was reading business plans. And what my network of 5 advised me is, stop looking at business plans. Start reading people better. You're making poor judgments in terms of who you're doing business with. Business ideas look fine, but the people are either very inexperienced, in which case they're unpredictable in moments of stress. I mean, you don't want to go to battle with someone who has no experience and whose reaction to a disappointment is unpredictable. You also may well you also appear to have chosen some pretty slick individuals who know exactly how to get that money out of your pocket. You've got to make a better judgment on people. That group of 5, it's interesting, because I trusted them, and they obviously trusted some others, and by the time we had a second meeting to look at some additional business ventures, new technologies, there weren't 5 anymore, there were 10. I got away with water and crackers at the first meeting, but I couldn't get away with water and crackers at the second, so now it's Coca-Cola and wraps. And by the third meeting, there's 15, and they want to go to the country club for dinner, and I'm going broke. But I asked the key question at that moment. I said to them, did my business advisory turn into a business network? In other words, did you meet someone who you want to meet again? Yeah, dummy, that happened last meeting. And that group is now 11,000. Now, there's obviously a few stories between 5, 10, 15, and 11,000. And the story is, what I realized when someone said to me, what are you doing? When the numbers were up around 100 for the dinner, we did something like this. We brought 3 early-stage startups into the room that were looking at a new technology. We had them present that to the room, giving them, I think it was 9 minutes max. Told them to tell us a little bit about the journey, but they never would. They'd always tell you about their product and use it as a sales opportunity. But I would tell them, someone in this room has something for you that you don't know about. Money, marketing, management, manpower, any one of those M's. Everybody came away getting something out of those sessions. A fellow named Wayne Karpoff asked me in one of those meetings, he said, what are you doing? I hadn't given it, I think, a great deal of thought. I said, I'm just having a party. Bring people together with a common interest in the commercialization of emerging technologies and seeing where it goes from there. I figure that's value in itself. But then I looked at the room a second time and I thought, you know what I think I'm really doing? I'm building trust. These people want to do business. They've expressed an interest in the commercialization of technology, commercialization business, emerging technology, something that isn't here yet, not something you go to the Chamber of Commerce for. They have no place to go to have a dialogue about emerging technologies. And what I'm doing is building trust among people who didn't know one another before. And now that they know one another, they may do business, because you never do business like that. You do business like that. You start business out with a relationship. Unless you're in a monopoly, unless you're fed from the top, and then you argue to get your money. You get it through logic or you get it through demonstrations. Those who need to get it from a market start out building relationships first. And that's what we were doing. We were building relationships that continued to build and made a transformation from Kinkaide Enterprises to the Edmonton Council for Advanced Technology to the Alberta Council of Technologies, which today has a subscriber base of 11,000 and looks each year at a new technology. And as I said, and this year our theme is Innovation Enterprise, the People, the Passion, where we look for entrepreneurs to tell the story of their journey of starting a company, so that people are not naive about the challenges. I'd be delighted if we could convince the baby boomers that it's a better investment to invest in technology in Halifax than to send money to their broker in Toronto. I think there's probably enterprise in your community, as there are in many, but we haven't really established the market for finding technologies. We've begun to talk openly about incubators. We talk openly on our business programs about commercialization. about building bridges between the community and the institutions of our universities and our colleges, as if those bridges have never been built before other than through the importing and exporting of students and faculty. There seems to be a change going on of this institution not crumbling or breaking down, but becoming increasingly relevant in a world today that is a worldwide competition for knowledge. And rather than keeping it in the keep, we want to spread it out. We want to move it quickly. And we don't have the framework. We don't have the culture. We don't have the experience of moving knowledge from the university or from research labs into society and commercialize it as we must to compete in a global society. I think that's well underway. And the rebels are the students. And their armament is the internet. And it's astounding. And they don't want PowerPoint. They want stories. They want to feel it in here. They can get it up here, but they want to feel it in their guts. They want to find those who they can trust to do business with. And that's why I advocate, whether or not we're talking about ethics and or technology, we need to build networks to have discussions about the relevance of technology and the commercialization and competition, but we need to make sure that ethics is in the discussion. Because the changes are huge. And that's the essence of my presentation, is the technologies, whether it be analytics, whether it be stem cells, whether it be fusion energy or others which we could talk about, any one of them have the capacity or potential to be transformative, to change the very way in which we live, work, govern. We should be talking about this. We should be talking about it openly in society, and I don't think we are. I think we've left ethics in the hands of the professions or in the hands of government. We've abandoned a dialogue about the relevance of family, the relevance of community, the relevance of the individual. These technologies can have dramatic impact at every level, so we should be talking about it. I don't have a lot more to share other than some of my own stories. Some of them are fascinating. Some of the most fun are coming here to Nova Scotia. I'll sort of end on that high. This great place here. Great place in the world. I love the sea. I love the coast. Every time I've come out to Nova Scotia and I meet people like Chris and others who I've met in the last day, I've had a delightful time, and this is one of them. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was great. So we have time for a question and answer period. The microphone is in the middle of the aisle here, so I would ask people to be fairly succinct with their questions, and we'll have time for more people to participate. I know there may be some questions through the chat that we'll get an opportunity to also hear those. So I'll mediate, and you can...
Questions? I know there's some because I had a chance to chat with a few of you beforehand.
When I used to teach at university, I had a sign on my office that said, "Technology is the answer." But what was the question? Thank you very much, because you've proposed a number of very important questions. Now, my question for you is that in working to explore the ethical and economic and other questions of new technologies, we need to get together. We need to build the kind of networks that you have. But in the absence of a champion, such as you have been, somebody who has the resources to travel and to make connections and to find out what is going on in various fields, what guides can you give for other people elsewhere? Relying on the internet alone is not likely to be completely successful. How do you sort out the wheat from the chaff? And there's plenty of chaff on the internet, as you know. So if you're working in your own little space trying to figure out what's going on, for example, with fusion energy, very difficult unless you're able, as you are, to and other people who have the resources to travel and to talk to people at that level. So what advice would you provide to small groups working to figure out and to deal with some of the very fundamental questions that arise from new technologies?
It prompts a couple of comments. First of all, I want to say that this challenge should be taken up by the arts, by liberal arts. engineering, architecture, the professions themselves are not likely to be as good as they could be without the presence of those in the liberal arts. I'm saying that with goose pimples, because I'm not sure I can prove why I believe that. But I think that the dialogue and the discourse that comes from theology and from philosophy and from sociology and from psychology adds a certain richness about our institutions, about our origins, about our history, about what we value to technology, that I don't think those in the professions and those in the technical areas will address as richly as they should or could without the presence of the liberal arts. So I'm pretty adamant that nobody should be giving up on the liberal arts today. If anything, the leadership should be coming from there, and that's my disappointment, is I don't think they get it. Leadership in this area can come from young people. I run into a lot of young people that are very nervous about whether what they have studied is relevant. And what I often tell them, and I can remember being at the University of Calgary a couple of years ago, and the room was 400 students who were dealing with issues of career management. And I got done doing my little spiel, and a young lady stood up during the Q&A period, and she said, I just want to know if I studied the right thing. And I asked her, well, what did you study? What are you taking to the market? And she gave me this little sliver of microbiology that her professor had said, you've got to really narrow down your area of expertise, and when you've got it, you'll own it. And first thing I said to her is probably the only place you're going to find employment around that little sliver of expertise is in a very specialized environment, and likely in the US, unfortunately. But you've learned much more than that. You've got relational skills of discovery, of working in teams, of being able to communicate well. Do you present that when you go to market? That whole room did a flip. That it wasn't just knowledge that they had to sell, but they were people with relational skills that organizations were thirsting for. When I was with KPMG, what we looked for was enthusiasm and a can-do attitude, and we'll teach you a lot of the rest. But the real essence of leadership, I think, can come from the baby boomers. They have the time, and golf, gardening, and grandchildren ain't enough. The geriatric G-force is not sufficient. They've had a life at a job they probably liked and worked hard in that, and they probably got paid for it and want to continue in some capacity. And I'm speaking there as one a little bit ahead of the baby boomers, but I've gone through that in the last 12 years myself. I have probably enjoyed the last 12 years where my wife said I got my retirement half right, I just don't get paid. But the reality is I've had a wonderful time doing meaningful things and trying to build something. That you can spend 12 years on diversifying an economy, on advancing commercialization, on some of those higher order issues where you don't need that immediate return. I'd like to see the baby boomers as a source for helping capitalize the financing of these early stage enterprise. I'm terrified that the government will discover that there's $1 trillion ready to be released by the retirement and by the passing away of the baby boomers. $1 trillion that I think they're going to take in a wealth tax to pay off the debt that the baby boomers created during that golden bubble as they made their way through society. Or that $1 trillion will go from the parents to the kids for one hell of a party, or we'll find a way to stimulate the flow of some of that capital into early stage investing, whether it be through their children or through opportunities within their community. I would hope we'd find some way to incentivize the baby boomers' $1 trillion to get reinvested in our economy without government intervention. So hopefully I've touched on a little bit, but I extended it beyond that. Liberal arts very important, baby boomers very important, building networks very important, but communities have to buy in, and they need that leadership locally. Yes?
Firstly, I have an opinion. I feel as if you focus simply on the social aspect of technology and disregarded the significance of the incorporation of biology with technology. But my question is this, you're stating the social economical implication of technology in our current society, how it is inevitably transforming every existing thing. So my question is this social economical implication with progression, or rather exponential growth of technology, does it imply that we're still evolving socially, or are we still evolving socially, or are we still evolving biologically?
They're interacting.
They're interacting?
I don't see, I think boundaries are disappearing within these disciplines. the interactions between knowledge sources. We have built within our universities terrible silos. And we've isolated certain forms of knowledge from other forms of knowledge that when they start to interact, that's where the real creativity and innovation occurs. So I think we've got to look at biology beyond the boundaries of biology. I think we've got to look at medicine beyond the boundaries of just medicine. But we've created these silos of knowledge that what's going on in society today is they're beginning to blend. And there is the source of innovation and creativity. I can remember when I was on campus at the U of A, and I shared this with someone this evening at dinner, when I had come up from New York. I came to Canada in 1964 to go to graduate school in Alberta instead of going to the Peace Corps in Venezuela. There's a story in itself. In any case, early on arrival, I went to the faculty lounge, and there was the president of the university who had come to visit this new department that had been assembled with profs from around the world. And there we were, naive graduate students, listening to a president talk to his faculty and expressing pride in having brought and assembled this group of astounding researchers together. And he said to them, point blank, he said, there will come a day where I need to call on you to build relationships with our community, and I hope I can count on you. And to a man they said, not me, I came here to do research. And I thought that was just a moment, and I have recounted that story so many times to try and understand what it is we now need to do to build relationships in our university within and across. That was a very, very important moment for a young man to see, to realize I did not want to work in that cell. I wanted to be outside where there was a lot more action. I love the discovery, but the real challenges were doing that within the context of a society at large. So when I talk about biology, I want to talk about the world at large, and I want to talk about biology being only a part of it. Did I get your question right? I had a little difficulty understanding it.
Yeah, you got it right.
Okay, thank you. Are you in biology?
Philosophy.
Philosophy, no, you're in the arts. You're in the arts. Don't apologize. I mean, this is a time for people in philosophy and in history, but to look at the world as it is today and be disappointed that we're not getting the riches out of society that we could be getting if we would only work better together and get these knowledge forces to work in sync with one another. So, thanks for coming today.
I have one more question on the computer here, on the chat line.
Okay.
How should the liberal arts and the world of innovation communicate? Can you give us some examples?
Well, this is the bridging again. I mean, we've got these silos, and because they haven't had experience with one another, they don't trust. They think they have motives that aren't in sync. So there's usually that intermediary. Seminars, conferences, workshops is where you know, high tech, high touch. The high tech is the internet. It's not going to work just with internet alone. You've got to have that high touch. So the blending of the usage of internet as a way to convey large amounts of information, but the building of the trust is really something that happens on a local level. I can't add a lot more than that. The way to bridge it is that leadership of those that are curious enough to want to go across the moat, to be on the other side, to move from the university and to do a sabbatical, not at another university, but within a community context. And I think we need to be thinking differently. I used to ask students whether fear played a role in their career. I used to give this lecture in the Rocky Mountains on Business Day for students at the universities that would congregate in Jasper Park once a year as commerce graduates from across Canada. And I was asked to give an address to them, and I thought, well, they want me to talk about KPMG and the grand things about KPMG and why they should work for KPMG. And I'm thinking, whatever I'm going to tell them, they probably also heard from Ernst & Young and Price Waterhouse and yada. What could I possibly do to catch their attention that they might believe that KPMG is different? And so I tried something very different. And I remember practicing it. First thing I did differently, I was not going to do a PowerPoint, because I knew they've had PowerPoint galore. So I've got to do something different. I'm going to tell them a story. And I got to the Jasper Park Lodge, and it was a room not unlike this. And I went to each table, and I said to each person or to each table, I want you to think about what you're most afraid of now that you're getting ready to graduate. fear? What could fear possibly, how could fear be possibly relevant? And then I got to the stage, and I knew Thursday nights are the nights that they go drinking. And this is Thursday night. And so my opening is, I've got about a 45-minute presentation for you. And I could feel that room just go, but I've consolidated it down to about 5 minutes. So I think they were back again. So I had them on the yo-yo. And I said, the reason I asked you about about what you're most afraid of, by the way, what are you most afraid of? Students will not tell you that they're afraid of anything. They don't want to look weak in front of one another. They won't even use the word help. It takes a little while. When we used to do some training with students, we found out it takes maybe 3 meetings before they begin to open up and use the word openly about fear and concerns. But we did get them into the open. And they asked questions like whether I studied the right thing, whether there will be a job for me, et cetera. I said, I'm going to tell you about my story. Oh, I'm going to personalize my discussion. I'm a KPMG executive, and I'm going to tell you about the role of fear in a career. Fear in a career. How can there be fear? I mean, you're managing partner for KPMG. You're in charge of knowledge management for Canada. You were an assistant deputy minister. You got a PhD in brain research. Oh, I could tell you the dreams I had before the anxiety of that moment. I told them about my trip to Canada on a train and getting off the train to get a cup of hot chocolate and the train leaving without me. I told them about that fear. I told them about the fear the day before my candidacy and having a dream of jumping on top of the rosewood table with a machine gun and shooting all of my profs. I told them, time and time, I told them about the various junctures, the moments when I left government and went into consulting and didn't even know what an RFP was and afraid they might find out. But how learning would kick in and how fear was always a trigger for learning. And learning was always a foundation to get on with it. And so you learn to harness that fear. In fact, you often look for it. It's the energy that you get from that fear. Use it. Use it to the end of learning and use it to the end of networking. And I could give them something there that I don't think they got from anyone else, which was the personalization of a career that was driven in many ways by moments where fear rose its ugly head and I learned how to manage it. But the other thing I learned and I shared with them, and I will definitely share with them in future, is learning was not enough. I needed data. My background was science. Whenever I went into a new career, I was always very concerned that I didn't know the culture, I didn't know the environment, didn't know the language. And so I was always looking for data. And I realized that's probably what ultimately made me a pretty good manager, and no matter what career I went into, is I was always bringing data into the discussion, into the decision. So I share a number of things with you today. The role of fear in a career, the importance of networking, the relevance of seniors as sources of leadership, but to build that intergenerational bridge. And to recognize that, well, here's the way I'll do this wrap-up story. I have in my hand here an orb. Maybe you can't see it, but it's like a globe, a crystal. And I discovered this sitting in a recliner getting ready for an event like this, where I needed to know what my wrap-up was. It was the analytics conference. And I thought, this orb is connected to everyone on Earth. Can you imagine? Yeah, I mean, we've got BlackBerries and iPads and computers. We can almost imagine that we're no longer 7 steps away from everyone on Earth. We're probably a few, if maybe 2 or 3. So you can almost imagine being able to connect to everyone on Earth. But it's got more than that. It's also connected to everything we ever knew. It's connected to the Library of Congress. It's connected to more than what Google's got. It knows my DNA. It's got access to everything. What would you do with it? I decided I'd trick it. You know how I tricked it? I asked it, what should we be doing tomorrow? Because it can't know tomorrow. It can only know the present and the past. So I thought I had it tricked because it didn't answer, and then it wiggled. Wait, I'm not done yet, it said. Hold on, you're making good headway. From what I can see, everything that you've been doing, you're making progress, you're making headway. Well, that was very validating to the businesses, the corporations, the professions, the government. We're making headway. They thought I was getting ready to put it down, but I'm not finished yet. Oh, it wasn't your technology, it wasn't your professions, it wasn't your government. It was doing to others as you would have them do unto you. That's what got you to where you are today. Thank you.
Wow, what a pleasure to thank you for that. It was a bit heavy when you start with words like who to trust and I'm too busy to see, and you start reflecting as I'm in the public sector and you start thinking we are in the data business and I can feel and see what you're talking about. And then you bring in the inspiration of not only for our institutions and for us as individuals, things about raising the dialogue, about leaning in to understand how we can be people that earn trust and also be aware of where our trust is warranted. So Dr. Kinkaide, it was a gift. I think just by the people choosing to be in this room tonight, we want to be part of that dialogue of adding the riches to society, to leaving it better than we found it, and being part of keeping the dialogue alive. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
I also want to reiterate, as Dr. Bradshaw did, the thanks for the organizations that obviously invest in creating forums for this kind of dialogue. The Sobey School of Business, the Canadian Business Ethics Research Network, the Alberta Council of Technologies, and also the ongoing support for this forum being the Atlantic School of Theology and St. Mary's itself. So thank you. Thank you all for making time tonight to participate. And I would ask for some housekeeping items, if you wouldn't mind filling out the evaluation form. I believe the live streaming people joining us can do so as well. And if you just leave them where you're sitting, we can pick those up. And there's a reception in the lobby, and if we can create space for Dr. Kinkaide to make his way there, there'll be plenty of time to have some informal chat and keep the conversation going. Thank you very much.